Chapter 5, Margot, pages 170 to 177. You are not Charlotte. Pardon? You are not my wife. Well, I sure would hope not, unless I've missed something. The Dutchman looked down at Tom, who looked back expectantly. That's not Mama. The archaic wooden paneling beside the door read 9 Fisher in a jaded white lettering. Early touches of dark had set below the canopy that enclosed the old-timey home. The humidity still brought about a coat of unfavorable density to the space and all its contents, but the Dutchman's hands had at once gone cold. He felt a hint of angst that had not yet resolved itself into helplessness, but the line that separated the two grew thin. And who might the two of you be? The woman who asked the question was a beautiful one, so much so that the Dutchman had to remind himself that she wasn't what he had been searching for all along. She was a slender, never frail figure, several inches shorter than the Dutchman, who stood upright and defensive, like she might not have stood 6 months earlier, but had learned something when she had to. Her arms were crossed. She didn't succumb instantly to Tom's usefulness, nor the Dutchman's apprehensive modesty, didn't smile. He noticed her hair was wet, fiercely midnight black like his father's, and matted across her scalp, tucked behind each ear. The down shirt she wore, horizontally striped. Tuscan yellow, pink, in the azure of the pond in that order, it was off-colored at the shoulders where her hair had dampened the cloth. We live here, replied the Dutchman, never with the intent of overstepping his bounds. He knew no better. He meant it hopefully, as if she might reveal that she house-kept for his Charlotte and had been expecting them. She saw as much, and, by the way she uncrossed her arms and adopted a curious gaze, appeared less threatened than she had previously. He liked her instantly. Liked. By and by, that liking would nurture. So nearly did he forget where he came from. He saw her like he imagined bees saw flowers, breathed her in, and wore her like he once had Charlotte, like a bee when it first lands upon thistle, and she gave him something that he then gave right back. Is that so? Yes, said Tom, and looked toward Papa for an assertion. Then where does that leave me? A thin wind brushed across the landscape. As it did, the Dutchman watched the woman's almond capris ruffle. She was barefoot. He didn't keep his eyes in one place for any longer than he should have, out of respect, or maybe out of fear that his father would show up and reprimand him. Manners were the same across oceans. He tried to conjure up an explanation, but the words didn't come easy. They never did. The woman waited, guarding her door, but no longer herself. He thought briefly to abort, but something kept his feet glued to the earth before her. Here, apparently. She gave the Dutchman a wide-eyed grin. He was far from the men she'd grown accustomed to all her life, always surrounded by the presence of the highbrow and the gallant. He was less formal, more earthly, hair like soil, eyes fertile. He reminded her so little of her father that she couldn't help but think of him, to compare and contrast their very differences, and something warm arose of it. Where those men wore suits, this one wore a loosely buttoned camp collar shirt, and in place of a firm handshake, he held his boy in front of him, hands upon his shoulders, and offered a pleasant and unassuming smile, as if lending his kin as a peace offering. The boy stood between Papa and not Charlotte, the collateral for conversation. My name is Margot, she said, crouching to Tom's level and eyeing him like she'd been trying to identify something she'd lost. And what can I call you, young one? I'm Tom, and this is Papa. He turned and pointed upward to distinguish between the man and the man-like oaks that bordered the ancestral home. We come from Nederland and now visit America. Promptly, he unzipped the panel of his worn suitcase and retrieved a handful of sand as evidence. He set it atop the suitcase before him and watched as the grains dispersed against the vinyl surface, drew a finger among the grains, and assorted them at random. She stood, looked ahead at the Dutchman. Their pulses met. She dithered momentarily, but a fleet of questions she felt postponable, and he was cause for immediate comfort. Margot, she said to him, and made it her own solemn responsibility to extend a hand. He took her hand in his own and lightly shook. It was pleasant and fit well in his grasp. Margot, the Dutchman simply repeated, and let the OU climb to the next rung as it had when she had said it. We're sorry to bother you. Nonsense. It's no bother at all, in fact. I could use the company. Company was all he wanted, too. Regrettably, he said, I'm looking for my wife. She was looking at her husband. Have you seen her? Asked the Dutchman, and withdrew a black and white portrait of a pretty young lady from his leather wallet. She wore a frill-trimmed milky white blouse, ruffled at the neck, and curtsied in the backdrop of a wheat field, as if she were Miss Manners herself. It was a photograph that the Dutchman had taken during a picnic in Amersfoort on a day not long before she left. This is Charlotte? She asked, and studied the face. She was gorgeous, undeniably so. Margot felt a ping of resentment toward the photo. Yeah, said the Dutchman humbly, and aren't I one lucky man? She's one lucky woman. She handed back the photograph. Touching the large, frayed hands of the Dutchman's again, she felt a cool piece of metal and noticed he had on a ring where it meant she could not impose. It had loosened on the Dutchman considerably ever since the tentative engagement, had narrowed the circumference of his finger around where it grasped, and was now hardly anything more than a carnival ring toss. The Dutchman often had to squeeze it down with his thumb to keep the ring from falling. He thought he might not notice if it did. He took the photograph and placed it back into his wallet into his rear pocket. He wanted to reciprocate to Margot, but as his thumb caught the ring from its inevitable slide, again he lent himself a reminder of his objective. He looked at Tom and wondered if the boy would know the difference in time. It's getting dark, Margot said, sadly. Why's that? Hard to see her face. She blushed unfamiliarly. The Dutchman rubbed his ring, kicked himself. And where have you to go when night falls? I couldn't say. Better find out soon, she said, cold-like, and the remark stung the Dutchman some. She hadn't meant it inhospitably. She wasn't an open book either. Daylight is fading, she added, the playful and bright ring of her voice returning. Tom and I will go to the dunes if this is okay, sleep there, and look again for Charlotte tomorrow. We must have read wrong the map, he said, knowing they hadn't and Yospos couldn't. He made Tom unwillingly brush the sand off the vinyl and picked him up in one arm. Placing him at the rear of the scooter and his luggage on the footrest, the Dutchman thought about giving it all up. If not, he wished at least that the night would make way for tomorrow so that he nor Tom would have the chance to let the inevitable fester in their minds. What would one night do that months hadn't? Everything, he thought. Then, they'd been too far gone to discern, but now they were here. Not just in the country nor the island, but here. 9 Fisher Way, and she wasn't. Some things aren't the same across oceans.